Hey, welcome to Business Over Brew. I'm your host, Nick Darr. Pleased to be joined in studio this episode by Chris Slusser, currently Madison County Treasurer, but I guess soon to be Madison County Chairman, huh?
Yes, December 1st.
December 1st.
I'm kind of almost doing two jobs right now because since I have no opponent in the general election, so everyone's just kind of deferring to me on everything, all the department heads, and it's an interesting dynamic. And it's a very busy time in the treasurer's office, so my schedule's very packed.
I was going to say you're probably by far the guest that we've had that most people have written checks to, at least. Most of our audience has written you a check at some point.
Thankfully for the audience, they won't have to put my name on the check anymore. They'd have to write to somebody else, but it's not going to be me. So
I always thought that was interesting that the check was made out to you.
It's because of the way the accounts are set up at the bank. And so the bank, that's the way it is on the account. So they want that on there, but they will still take it if it says Madison County Treasurer. So when I'm at the counter, I like waiting on customers. I just like interacting with people. And when they ask me, how do I make out the check? I never say Crystal. I just say Madison County Treasurer is fine, or we can stamp it or something.
Right.
Because it's kind of embarrassing almost to me, to
it makes
it tell people
like,
right.
I'm getting all this money. It's great.
Yeah.
So, I think most people probably know about the political side or a lot of it, and we'll touch on some of that. But
sure.
This show, of course, is Business Over Brew. So I want to talk about the economic side, and you've got a really interesting business history as well. So just talk a little bit about your career before politics.
Sure. So I worked as an investment advisor for about 8.5 years. And had my own, branch office or independent type office in Wood River for several years. And then I got to where I just wasn't having a lot of fun anymore. The market changed a lot in 08, 09.
It did?
That
was.
Yeah. It was
That's when I got into the financial services industry for some reason.
It was a painful time to be in that business. And so by 2010, I had been telling my wife, I was like, you know what, I'm not enjoying this anymore. I never thought I'd want to do anything else, but I do not enjoy this anymore. And she said, I've been able to tell, that you're not having the fun you used to have. And it's become almost a bird or a job as opposed to like a career and something you enjoy. And so I didn't even know what I wanted to do. And I never had to put a resume together or anything. I was in my 30s. I think I was 33 years old. And then we prayed about it. And next thing you know, Bob Plummer, who owns RP Lumber, called me and wanted me to come in and see him. So I was like, okay. And Bob's a friend and a good guy. I love gleaning knowledge from him every chance I get, picking his brain. So when he invites you in, you go,
Sure, yeah.
And he said, we have some opportunities here that you might be interested in. He said, I'm sure you're probably very happy with what you're doing,
And you're like, not really, no. Yeah.
And he said, but, and I don't know what it would take to get you to walk away from me, what you're doing. And at the time that would have been like almost anything, but I didn't say, I held my cards close,
Sure. Yeah.
And then,
it would take a lot. I don't know. Yeah.
And I said, well, what did you have in mind? And he says, well, we're sitting on a lot of cash and we're in a great position to expand our commercial real estate portfolio. And we want to be very aggressive with that. And he said, and I'd like to have you as part of that team and help you drive that. And I said, I'm honored and flattered. I said, that I don't know anything about commercial real estate. I said, I own a couple of rental properties, but it's not, those are residential. And He laughed and he says, I had been Jason Plummer, his son's campaign treasurer for when he ran for lieutenant governor in 2010. And, they put a lot of personal money into that race. I think about $1.4 million. And I managed that like it was my own money. I mean, I raked every vendor over the coals to make sure that they were being transparent with their invoices and not because in that business, it's people can get a little shady. And
sure.
And so he said, we like your values. We trust you. And he said, we like your work ethic. And he said, we can teach you everything else. And so, we had discussions and he ends up bringing me on board and it was like drinking from a fire hose for a year or so, but then it was like working for them and managing their commercial real estate portfolio is kind of like working for the Yankees,
Yeah.
And it's like I told myself, I'm like, this is tough. He's a very demanding guy to work for. And I was overwhelmed sometimes with the workload but it was just fun. I mean, it's like playing Monopoly. We were buying so many properties and we were always in a good position of leverage and negotiations.
Right.
And, it to this day is the most fun job I've ever had, most fulfilling and enjoyable thing. I loved being county treasurer, but it was very fast paced. We were doing big multi-million-dollar deals, and I just really enjoyed it and had a lot of fun with it. So
I'm going to move that back just a little bit.
Okay, sure.
There we go. That should be good.
Yeah.
We'll edit that part out. It's such a great story though of just your integrity leading to another role,
Right.
And not taking shortcuts in that role. What are some things that you learned about business from, obviously one of the best in our area, certainly.
Sure. Yeah, I think Bob and then Jason Plummer and then Bruce Riedel, who's the CFO there, who a lot of people don't know, and just one of the most brilliant financial minds I've ever met. Bob and Bruce, they pretty much have photographic memories, and I would revive deals from like, that had been kind of dead, and we revived them like a year later, and I'm going through this file, and I would go to meet with them, and they knew they remembered all the details of these deals. And I'm like, man, we've done 100 deals since that. How do you remember all these details? But I think what I learned from them was negotiation skills and not putting your cards on the table, being comfortable with silence and negotiations.
Right.
And and it was just, and Bob also he's such a hard worker. And, some people have a misconception of him because he's a pretty private guy, and they know he's super wealthy. And, I think he's a very charitable guy. I think he does most of it anonymously. That's more of his Christian values. And so people don't see his name they're starting to see his name on RP Lumber on a few more things in Edwardsville now. But I mean, typically you wouldn't see his name on a lot of things.
Right.
But he is there at 4:30 a.m. every day, except for Sunday, including Saturdays. And you can never beat him in the office. And the nice thing is,
and still he's been,
yes,
I mean, he's not a newbie. He's not a startup trying to get it going. He's pretty successful.
He still thinks of himself as a small business owner, I think,
right.
But I mean, they have a massive empire now. I mean, I think they have 80 some lumber yards in 6 different states, and then a big commercial real estate portfolio. He's part owner of the LA Dodgers. He's in that ownership group. And, but he was very demanding, but he never asked you to do something that he wasn't willing to do. And there'd be nights where I couldn't sleep or something. I'd wake up in the middle of the night. I couldn't get back to sleep. And then, you just lay there for hours, and then you're miserable the next day. And it was, by like 4:30 a.m., I'm like, you know what? Bob's in the office. I'm just going to go to the office and start working instead of getting there at 7 like I normally do, or 6:30. And so I'd get there at 5, and then he's already there. And, he always gives you a hard time. And, if you came in at like 7, he'd always say, "Oh, good afternoon," But yeah, I think it was just the work ethic, doing things with integrity all the time. And he always said, if it's gray, stay away. If it's a gray area, we stay away from that. We want to do everything with integrity.
Man, just a lot of questions from that, and just some things. I think one thing that you talk about, the negotiation skills of, obviously he had a belief or a confidence that, and if it's gray, stay away. That's a great philosophy, because I've been just, offered a few deals, and you really get into them and you start to get anxious about, I really want to make this happen, and he may have felt that way, but he certainly, I'm sure, never was experienced enough to not let the other party feel that way, and be willing to walk away and recognize that he probably didn't need the deal.
Right. That's the other thing I think it was fun to be in that position, because it's like, he doesn't need anything else. You know what I mean? But so he's not going to overpay for a deal, or, I mean, occasionally there's something they really want, and they'll pay probably a little more than they felt like they wanted to, but he was always looking long term. I mean, there were some deals we did. There was a particular deal we did up in Central Illinois, where the business we were doing business with, it's a chain corporation, and they really wanted to buy this property, but we got in and bought it first. And so then we were not willing to sell it to them for what we were going to sell it to them for a lot more if they wanted it. They didn't want to pay that. So they negotiated a lease, and they gave us these different options, and they were long-term. And we're talking like options going out like 30 or 40 years.
Right.
And the ones that paid more in the beginning, he was not interested. He was interested in the one that over like 30 or 40 years paid a lot more. And Jason and I, his son, we were just like puzzled at why he wanted that long term. And he said, I even asked him, I said, why would you, I didn't want to say at your age, but it's like, why would you want? And he just said, I may not be around to see that, but my grandkids will, And so he's always had this long-term vision and legacy and,
Yeah. We run Dave Ramsey on the radio station.
I'm
here.
a huge disciple of Dave Ramsey too. So,
and, he talks about making decisions for 5 years down the road, not 5 minutes down the road, which is tough to do because a lot of our lives and day to day, it's like, I got a 5-minute decision in front of me. I gotta make, and sometimes you lose perspective on the 5 year stuff, which is more important, obviously.
Yes, absolutely.
So from there, great. I mean, just a great educational opportunity, really. I'm sure you probably weren't looking at it that way, maybe at the outset.
I honestly felt like I got an MBA working there. I don't have an MBA, but I feel like I have better than what I could have gotten in an MBA program.
Right
there.
So where'd you go from there?
Well, then I got the opportunity to become county treasurer.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I sat in Bob's office and he was telling me, he was excited. They were glad, they were happy for me. But he said, you're leaving me in a bind here, a big hole, And I said, I know. And he said, and I said, well, I didn't want this job when it was first offered to me, the position that I finished in my last 3.5 years, because I'd been in a different role at we had an office in Chesterfield and we spun that company off and I came in-house. And he said, why? And I said, well, because the guy I replaced, I used to see him here getting his butt chewed out in your office all the time. And Bob will never use profanity or anything like that. He can chew somebody out without using profanity better than anybody.
That's a good skill.
But I said, I didn't want to be that guy. I don't operate well under those conditions. I just need you to set the expectations and we agree on it and I go do my thing, and he laughed, and I said, but I've been told by everybody else in the building here, the corporate office here, that I'm the only guy in the building that's never had my butt chewed out in your office, and he's looking down, reading contracts in a typical Bob fashion. He says, looks up and he says, you got 2 weeks left, But so I went on and became county treasurer and, go ahead. I
was going to ask, why do you think it was that you didn't get the butt chewing that almost everybody else got?
Well, I tried to always do things with excellence. I'm not perfect and I made mistakes, but also I knew that he's so strapped for time. And when you get into his office for, to have contract signed or have a discussion about a deal or something, he's on the phone ordering. He does all the buying for all their commodities for all their lumber yards.
Wow.
Like shingles, siding, lumber, drywall. And so that's what he loves to do. There's no CEO in America that does business the way he does because he enjoys doing the buying so much. And so when you get an opportunity to get in his office, like you can't screw around. And so the guy before me, I found out used to get chewed out because he would come in there with deals and Bob would start asking questions and he didn't know any answers and they had to keep going back and forth and Bob would get frustrated with him, And so I would study this, I wanted to make sure I was bulletproof when I came in. There's nothing he's going to ask me because I don't want to waste his time.
Right.
And I feel like I can get along with anybody, you know, Kurt Prenzler, the guy who just beat in the election. He's probably the only guy I haven't been able to get along with. And I'm very easygoing, but I think that, and I think that I never wasted his time and I went in and he knew I was doing things that would help make the company a lot of money and doing things with integrity. So,
well, just one common denominator at every stop of the way seems like for me is you're just a problem solver. And you figured out Bob was almost like a client for you, that you just had to figure out what his challenges were and be part of that solution. Whereas the guy before didn't really recognize that hey, one of his challenges is he's really super busy.
Right. And I learned quickly what his personality style was and how he operated.
Right.
And I knew, hey, I'm not even going to come to him with this because this is going to be a complete waste of his time, And so I just figured things out. And they gave me a lot more authority and, responsibility and decision making too, because once I figured out how they operate.
Right. So you got appointed to be treasurer, I think, at first, right?
Yeah. I was a county board member and I just gotten elected back onto the county board in 2016. And I was also chairman of the Republican Party. And so I had run a lot of the county board races. And so the county board, it was a 19-10 Democrat supermajority going into the 2016 election. And I was kind of the architect of the plan to take over the county board. And we recruited and raised money and I helped run all these races, and we won. I had to run myself. I wasn't excited about running for county board, but I knew that I had to be one of the people.
Right.
And so, yeah, I got elected, and then we had to choose. Prenzler got elected county board chairman. He was the treasurer. And so they had to fill that vacancy, that 2-year vacancy left on that term. And so, I had never asked for anything from anybody really, politically, but I had done so much for so many people that I had all these chips that I could cash in.
Right.
And I just said, you know what, I'd really like to be county treasurer. This fits right in my wheelhouse.
Right.
I have an investment background. I work in real estate, which is basically money in real estate is what the treasurer's office does.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah.
And so the Prenzler did not want to appoint me initially. He offered it to several other people who declined it. Some of them declined it because they wanted me to have it. And they had other things going on, careers. And he was kind of given an ultimatum that if you put anybody's name up other than Chris, the board's just going to vote it down. And so he, relented and,
and the friendship started.
Yeah. You know what? I tried very hard to get along with him. He's a very difficult guy.
Sure. Right.
It's played out in the media over the last several years.
So. I want to talk politics a little bit because you've been, I think when I started the radio station in 2000, I was covering the Madison County Board meeting. And I want to say at that point, it might've been like 26-3.
Yes,
26 Democrats, 3 Republicans. I remember Homer Hinkey was one of the Republicans, and he was
one
of the few.
One time he was the only one. It was 28-1. Yeah.
And now, and you've been one of the architects of that turnaround, which half the people watching probably won't like, but just talk about some of the strategies and what the plan was and how it happened. I've thought about, in Illinois politics, if somebody wanted to figure out how do you turn a blue county red, they should come to Madison County and ask some questions at least.
Well, that's actually what the Illinois Republican Party is doing. The Illinois Republican Party is a mess, and they're having turmoil right now. I don't know. I don't want to get into all that, but what I'll say is they had the state Republican Party convention down here last month in Madison County. You had it in Collinsville. Because they thought it was important, like Madison County really is the model for the Republican Party in Illinois and how to get things turned around, because it was so heavily one party. I mean, if you going into the 2010 election, the Democrats held every single countywide seat. They had a 19-10 super majority on the county board, might have even been 20-9, and then they had every judicial seat. So they had total control,
much like the state of Illinois now.
And they did a good job of, they had a patronage system going on where they hired people who, were politically connected, who would go out and work for them and help them get reelected and work their families and neighborhoods and all those things. And that's very hard to cut into. When I ran against Alan Dunson in 2012 for county board chairman, and Alan and I are very good friends, but at the time I was young and my ego clashed with his ego. And I was like, this place isn't big enough for the both of us, and I'm going to run against him. When I got out and started knocking on doors, like in Granite City, and which used to be a wasteland for Republicans. Now it's very red down there, but, when I would knock on doors, I was getting like old ladies who were Republicans who were like, I can't let you put a sign in the yard because my next door neighbor, he works for the county and he'll lose his job if Alan Dunson doesn't get reelected. I'm like, and I had numerous conversations like that. And then I realized like what I was up agast. I'm like, man, this sucks.
Yeah, that's tough to beat.
So, but what we did is, we stuck to our guns on property taxes, because that is just a devastating issue. Now I see it every day as a county treasurer. We have the second highest property taxes in America, and
in Madison County,
state of Illinois.
Okay.
Yeah. And in Madison County, the county board was raising the tax levy, 4 to 5% every year.
Mm-hmm.
And so people were just seeing this increase, and we didn't need the money, they just kept increasing it. And so we had a lot of waste and fat. And so we started voting against this every time and calling them out. And then they were given big pay raises all the time, every time to their, to the elected officials. And we started voting against some of that. Of course, then the Republican Party took it too far, and we didn't give raises for like 8 or 10 years to elected officials until recently. Finally, they're like, all right, we can't keep doing this forever.
Right.
And so we're going to give modest raises. But But we hit them on all those issues that I call them like 90-10 issues, where like 90% of the population is going to be with you.
Yeah.
And we didn't get focused in the weeds on some of this other stuff. Illinois Republican Party has been a mess because you have like Chicago area Republicans who are much more moderate than everybody outside of those collar counties. And it's kind of like the state of Pennsylvania. You have Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, and you have like Alabama in between, you know,
right?
I always say.
Sure.
And so they, Illinois is, you know, you have Chicago and then you have everything else. And then like St. Clair County is still a Democratic stronghold, but you know, it's hard because when a candidate goes to run statewide in Illinois as a Republican, to get through the primary, you got to be like super conservative and like super pro-life and super hardcore on all the social issues. And then you get into the general election and you get destroyed, you know, because, you know, the rest of, you know, the majority of that vote is out of Cook County and the collar counties. And if they're, you know, more liberal or at least more moderate.
Mm-hmm.
And so Darren Bailey was the greatest example of that.
Right.
I mean, absolutely horrible statewide candidate for us. He campaigned like he was running for, you know, governor of like Kentucky, you know, and that's not going to get you votes north of I-80. And it played out and he got absolutely destroyed, you know.
Well, and you look at, I mean, we've had, I guess in our lifetime, actually mostly Republican governors of Illinois.
Yeah.
But
they've been very moderate
socially. Like, I mean, it's hard to say George Ryan was a Republican really, but I guess he did have an R next to his name.
Yep.
But those are the type of governors that can probably win.
Right. More moderate.
Right.
Bruce Rauner was very moderate on social issues. Yeah. Actually very liberal on some social issues. But I think in Madison County, we just focus.
But you'd rather have that probably as a Republican than a Democrat, or especially a far left Democrat.
Right. That's what I said. I was not happy with some things Rauner did on like expanding abortion and taxpayer funding for abortion.
Right.
And that really, he and I had some very direct conversations, you know, in a room about that. And because that's an issue that's very personal to me because of our adoption story with our kids. And you know, I live it out in my life. It's not just a punchline for me, you know? And so he went a bridge too far with what he did, you know? And so, but anyway, so in Madison County, we focused on those issues that we know are going to resonate with the voters, are going to care about. And we showed that we were voting the right way. And then once we got control, then we've been very good at like, okay, we can't just do what the Democrats did when they were in control, because there is some push for some of that, you know, and we've had to, as a party and in leadership, we push back against it. Like, no, we have to govern like we said we were going to govern, or we'll lose the trust of the people, just like the Democrats did here locally. So
one of the things that concerns me about a lot of politicians is the lack of an evolution of beliefs. Like for me personally, when I was in my, 20s, probably up till 25 or so, I was a pretty hardcore left liberal. And then I kind of swung back totally to the other extreme for a while. And now I feel like I've come to hopefully a more reasoned, moderate view on a lot of different things.
Sure.
How have your political beliefs kind of evolved over the years?
So I would say on a personal level, I'm probably more conservative than like 98% of the people in this county. And I'm not ashamed of that. I never apologize.
Unapologetically, right. Yeah.
Right. But I understand, like, once I get elected, like I represent everybody. Here. I represent crazy far left people, crazy far right people that are even the few people that are farther right than me. And I'm not saying, you know, and some of the people they label far right today, like the MAGA extremist far right or something, you know, like Donald Trump's not really a hardcore conservative. Like,
no, I don't.
Fiscally, not that conservative. Socially, not. He's fairly moderate too. But the people who are the loudest sometimes, and I'm not saying anything negative about Donald Trump. I'm just saying in the reality, he's not a traditional conservative. And so
I would bet money voted for Bill Clinton twice. So
I guarantee you he did. Yeah,
they were pretty close.
They were. I think he was at their daughter's wedding.
Right.
You know? And so, but I think the media has labeled on the national level has labeled anybody who's the loudest as like the far right wing of the party or whatever. But they're just more. Some of them are just the loudest and the craziest, you know, and they don't necessarily have the traditional conservative values. But I think where I've become less strident in my political beliefs because I understand that we have to work with people And I am okay. I actually embrace people that disagree with me. I enjoy that.
Right.
I told some of my friends in politics that they don't even want to like associate with anybody who's like a liberal. And I'm like, how boring is that to just surround yourselves with groupthink, and I think that's very boring. My wife, I would consider her more of a moderate Republican, she's a social worker and kind of a bleeding heart at times.
Sure.
But, socially, she's pretty conservative, but we disagree on political stuff all the time, and it's fine. Like,
it doesn't make you love her any less
no.
I've got some friends in that camp too, where it's just like some that I just can't really have the conversations about because there's no convincing them. They're not convincing me. Let's just talk sports.
But I like having the discussions,
I do too. And I think it's tougher for you. It's easier for me because I'm not running for office ever. But I can be convinced of a position on a lot of different things from both sides. I'm open to changing my mind, I think is hopefully one thing that makes what I've considered to be a little bit of an enlightened position.
Even if I'm not going to agree, I like to hear and learn about where people are coming from. It helps you understand them better. You figure out like, how can I motivate? There are some things I can work with these folks on. So one of the things that I've done more than any other Republican in this area is outreach in the African-American community. And I am friends with pretty much every Black pastor in this county. I have every Black leader in this county, like political leader or whatever, I have a very good friendship with, and I can pick up the phone and they can pick up the phone. We can call each other anytime. My kids are, biracial. And so their mother's their birth mother was African-American. And so we like to go to African-American churches from time to time. Now we go to First Baptist in Bethalto, and it's a pretty white church, and so, our kids, we try to, have them be around Black people more than our lily white world is sometimes. And they love it. I mean, they don't even sit with us when we go to some of these churches because we know enough people in these churches. They abandon us as soon as we get there, and they're hanging out with other people there, So, but a lot of people in the Republican Party are like, how do you do this? Is it because you have Black kids, And I'm like, I laugh and I'm like, that's just so like, such a dumb thing to say. And when I tell a lot of my Black friends this, they laugh, and they're like, some of the Black leaders that endorse me and stuff, and some of the pastors that support me, they're like, Chris, you could have adopted like 20 Black kids, but if you don't show up to stuff, like we would never support you. But I said, I show up to things. And like I said, I always tell people, I'm like, you want to start making inroads? I go to church with some Black folks in Venice or Alton, because I've done it. And I was like, and you learn a lot about people when you worship with them. And I said, now you might have to eat lunch before you go because it's a 3-hour service, And I say that when at the pulpit in some of their churches, they always want me to come up and speak. I never talk politics from the pulpit. I can't say the same for some of the other politicians that go there that I'm there.
You don't close with, hey, vote Slusser or anything
no. Now some of the pastors will tell their congregation,
hey, vote for this guy.
It's just a little awkward for me, but but no, you worship with them, and I volunteer down there at one of the churches down in Venice. They feed the homeless, and they do like Christmas stuff for kids. And I'm down there, and I just hang out with them, and they're like family, So
but it's a good time to ask. Talk about this picture that we've got up on the screen.
I love it that you pulled that out. I think that's probably my Facebook profile picture.
It is,
it's one of my favorite pictures. So that is in Uganda last summer. June of 2023. My wife and I were there on a mission trip with a small group from our church. And I love that picture because those boys are all probably like 11, 12 years old. And like boys are boys, no matter where you're at in the world. These kids live in the most extreme poverty you can imagine. I mean, those 10 buildings around there. I mean, they live in some of those places. But yeah, that's has become my passion.
But just totally like boys would do, hamming it up for the camera.
Oh yeah, absolutely. The one kid's holding on to his tongue with the picture. The other kid's sticking his tongue out, and they're just they were so funny. They were giving me a hard time. They call white people Mzungus over there, and in Kenya and Uganda, and it just means white person. And they're always like, some of them not a lot of those. I think a lot of those kids spoke English. If they're in school, they usually are learning some English.
Right.
Not so much in Uganda as Kenya. Kenya, they all speak English if they're in school. But they were teasing me, calling me Mzungu. And
it would just be great if, as adults, we could have more of that spirit of these kids don't care that you're white or black or. And I don't think any of us did as kids either. It's learned behavior at some point. I don't know why, but
and my kids too. So my girls are 8 and 9, and they go to Zion Lutheran School in Bethalto. And there's one of the teachers at the school there. It was my daughter's teacher last year. One of my daughters. She has 4 kids, and 2 of them are adopted, and they're biracial or Hispanic, or I'm not sure what their nationality or their races, but clearly not white,
Right.
And my daughters just recently found out that those kids were adopted, and their minds are just blown. They're like, did you know that they're adopted too? And we're just like, well, we figured that. And they're like, how did you know? I'm like, well, their mom and dad have like blonde hair, blue eyes, and are white, and the kids are not. But it's just awesome that the kids don't even think about that,
I was thinking about you coming on as a guest. I was like, I don't want it to be like the Chris Slusser is such a great guy show, but it's just kind of the truth. Like you have all these interesting stories, and I want to have you touch on briefly just the adoption story of your children.
Sure. So we tried to have our own children, but naturally, and wasn't happening. And so I had always had it in my heart to adopt, someday. I never knew quite how that would work or how it would look. And so then, I always grew up in a Southern Baptist church in Medora, and we always gave money to the Baptist Children's Home, which is down in Carmi. And then over the years, people in my church had adopted kids through their adoption services. And then now I'm at First Baptist Bethalto. We've been there, 22, 23 years. And there are people in that church who had adopted some kids through Baptist Children's Home, through their adoption services, not the actual home. They have adoption services in Mount Vernon. And so we started the process, and we're all excited. We're filling out paperwork. We're going to do the training. It was like in April of 2014, I think. And then we get a letter from them like a month later saying, we've just had such a lack of placements of adoptions that we're not going to expand our pool of families right now because, they don't want the pool to be too big to where some of these families never get, because it's not a wait list. The mothers get to choose a family.
Right.
And so, my wife is just devastated, and she's like, I come home and she's got like on the laptop, she's got like 10 windows open, like every adoption agency in the Midwest. And she's just like, well, some of these are really expensive, but I think we should do. And I just said, I am just very calm and patient.
Right. Yeah.
Unless I'm watching like an Illini game.
Sure. I like the hat too, by the way, in the picture. Yeah. It's a nice little hat.
When I'm watching Illini basketball, I'm fired up.
Right. Yeah.
But anyway, I said, how about we just like chill, and I said, let's pray about this. And I said, and then tomorrow let's talk about it some more. And so we did. And then the next morning I said, God is telling us to wait. And so we're going to wait. And I said, I still think Baptist Children's Home is where we're supposed to adopt our kids. And she's like, okay. Well, then our small group started praying. We led a small group of married couples in our church. And so they were praying for us. And then like 2 weeks later or a month later or something, we get a letter saying, hey, we've had an increase in adoptions. And, the training is like next month. And so we want you to come. And my wife's like, holy cow, this is fast. Are we ready for this? And I'm like, yeah, we are.
Right.
You were ready 2 or 3 months ago.
Right.
And so we go through the training, we fill out the paperwork, and it takes a long time. And it's a little bit reformed now in the state of Illinois. Part of that is me getting all over Bruce Rauner about that whole thing he did. And so he agreed that like, we'll start making adoptions a little easier. And so we finally get licensed. Like we get submitted for license with our social worker from the children. So our adoption services came and she said, I'm going to submit you for licensing. You're all done. State of Illinois is notoriously slow. It could take 3 or 4 months before you get your license back. Like, okay. And so we're just like, okay, wait and see approach. We think it's going to be years, 6 months at least, and then all of a sudden we get our license in the mail in like 2 weeks, which is like record time for state of Illinois.
Wow.
And then the next day they called and said, hey, we have a mother whose looked at your book. We sent him a Shutterfly book that week. On like Monday, we sent it in the mail about us. And then like Friday afternoon, we get the license on Thursday. Friday, they call and they're like, hey, there's a mother who saw your book today and she's expecting and she wants to meet you. And I'm like, wow. And they're like, do you have your license yet? I'm like, yeah, we just got it yesterday. Like,
wow, man.
Yeah. And so we went and met her the next morning and she chose us and delivered 9 days later.
Yeah. I mean, it just feels like God with you every step of the way in that whole process. And
well, and the most amazing thing, I get emotional every time I tell a story, but so when we met her, she comes in, she's this younger African-American woman in her early 20s, I think at the time. And we were nervous. We're driving all the way out there. The only people we told was like Scott and Diane Miller, our good friends that we had dinner with. We had dinner with them every Friday night at the time, and we'd take turns like bringing takeout to each other's house. And we told them, and didn't want to tell the family because I didn't want to get all excited till it was a sure thing. And so then we drive out to Mount Vernon to meet her the next day. There's a pregnancy home there that the children's home runs for, women in crisis pregnancy or homeless women, those kind of things. So we had like tried to narrow down some names, and she comes in and she's all confident, beautiful young woman, and like very pregnant, and they didn't think she was going to make it to her appointment on Monday. So they needed us there on Saturday morning. And so we're like hoping we don't do anything awkward and like we want to make a good impression.
Sure.
She's like,
right.
She's like, well, do you have a name picked out? Because you get to name this baby. This is going to be your baby. And we're like, well, we've only had like 12 hours to think about it, but we haven't narrowed down to like 5.
Right.
And she says, well, let's hear them, And so I say the first one.
That's a lot of pressure.
Yes. And so I'm like, well, okay, the first one is Annabelle. And she looks at me kind of funny. And I'm like,
or we've got some other ones.
Yeah, I'm like, do you not like that name? And she goes, I've already been calling this baby Annabelle since the first trimester.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And I'm like, why that name? And she says, she's Black. That's not the typical Black name, Annabelle,
No, right.
I mean, her name is not a typical Black name either, but she says, that was my great grandmother's name. And I said, well, that was my great grandma's name too. That's why I chose it,
Oh my goodness.
And so then,
wow,
we go through the other names, but obviously I'm like, this has got to be Annabelle.
There's only one choice now.
And she asked if she could choose the middle name. She said it'd mean a lot to me, and I don't know what she's going to say. I mean, it may be something that's terrible that I don't
right.
want,
Yeah.
And so but I'm a politician, so I'm like, well, what did you have in mind?
Right. Yeah.
And she says, Renee. And we looked at each other. That's my wife's middle name.
Oh my goodness.
She didn't know that.
Wow.
And we're like, okay, God, you're just showing off now.
Right. Yeah. So, right.
Yeah. So she was born, 9 days later. And Annabelle has like the biggest personality you'll ever meet. All of her emotions are big. She's either super happy, super mad, super sad, but she's an amazing kid. And then the same mother got pregnant again, and contacted us, and she was nervous because she was embarrassed that she was pregnant again. And she was nervous that since we had a 9-month-old baby, that we were not going to be ready for another baby.
Right.
And I didn't think I was. We had just had a conversation about when do we put our name back in the pool. I said, I'm getting closer to 40 and, I don't want to be, my brother-in-law was like almost 50 when they had their second child. And I was like, I don't want to be an old dad, and, but I don't want to get a baby fast like we did with Annabelle. And then God had other plans.
Sure.
Then,
right.
Like 2 weeks later, we get this call from her. And so I was frustrated at first because I was like, why can't she be more responsible? Like, why is she's putting us in a position where, how can we not adopt our daughter's little sister? But God works out my frustrations and my bad attitude through manual labor. And so I went outside and did some work and, came back in for dinner, and my wife is just the sweetest person. And she's like, so what do you think? And I said, I think that you and I had 2 parents that were always there for us and loved us and showed us the right way to do things. And I said, this young woman did not have that. And I said, and I can't pretend to walk in her shoes. And I said, I could have made a mistake like she did. I probably wouldn't have done it twice, but who knows?
Right.
Yeah. I was pretty wild when I was younger, and I said, and I'm not going to judge her, and it would be really cool to adopt Annabelle's little sister. So then we had 3 months this time, and we're like, man, what do people with 9 months do? We had 9 days last time. And I mean, we didn't have
paint
anything. We hadn't even saved a penny. We hadn't bought anything yet when we got Annabelle because it just happened so fast.
Right.
So Zoe, we had all this planning. And so Zoe, at least
3 months of planning. Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah. We were like, man, let's get the show on the road here.
My wife has always said that, and we've got four kids. She's always said, if you wait till you're ready, you'll never have one because you're never really fully ready for it. So
that's right. And so we have an open adoption, and our kids are very comfortable with the fact that they're adopted. We've never hid anything from them,
Well, and it's a pretty beautiful, pretty beautiful story to share with them. So
it's a messy situation because there's a lot of loss involved there.
You still have to get over the fact that your birth mother gave you up. I mean,
right. And so, but my kids, I reassure them constantly that they weren't adopted and they were chosen,
Right.
And so, and they're stuck with us.
And that's right. I guess the other perspective of it is to look at what a selfless act it was on the part of that mother.
It is.
Because recognizing that she wasn't the best person for the job at the time.
She was in a really tough spot and was not going to be able to raise those girls. And I mean, that's her story to tell. It's not mine to tell here, but it's but I tell them, like, she loved you and cared about you so much that she created, and she chose life, and she created a plan for you, so
that could be a whole another podcast really, but I want to get back and kind of wrap up with the business side of things. I know one of the things you ran on to be Madison County Chairman was economic turnaround. Yes. And I think one of the signs I saw was the economic turnaround starts now. So what, and maybe it doesn't start till December 1st, but what?
No, we're getting things rolling now. So
what are some things that you have on the agenda to do differently? And I mean, economic development, and I assume in particular, as it relates to this show, small business development.
Yes. So that's the key focus. I think that is what helps turn what I've seen around the country when we travel places. I'm very my wife knows to look for these things now too, because I'm constantly looking for these things. Like, what is this? We went through Chattanooga on the way back from spring break. We visited my mom down in Florida, and we stayed in Chattanooga on the way down and on the way back. And that city was garbage like 15 years ago. And they have done some incredible turnaround things there.
Right.
And a lot of these cities and villages, they want to try to find like the big box store, and that's going to have all the sales tax revenue. And we're going to over incentivize them, and which is really a slap in the face to all the small businesses.
Why don't we get the incentives? Is always my question.
Exactly.
But
and so it's but most cities do it because they just see dollar signs instead of like, hey, if we can find unique niche businesses to come here and help fit in our community. It's something unique that people are looking for. That's what really helps some of these.
Right.
What I've seen some of the communities turn around. It's not easy. I don't have a magic wand. It's going to take a lot of work, and it's going to have. I'm working with some folks on a regional plan, especially for the Route 3 corridor. So like Alton down to Venice, all the river towns, as I like to call them. And I'm reminded that Granite City's technically not on the river, but I still consider it a river town. It's in that corridor. Because that's an area that was booming 50 years ago. I don't think we'll ever get back to the industrial boom that we have because our country's just different now and our economy is different. But there are still manufacturing opportunities. We are working on a really big project. I don't know if we'll get it. There's a site in Missouri that's also in competition for it. That'd be 400 to 600 good paying manufacturing jobs in the Granite City area, which would benefit the whole county.
It benefits small businesses if there's 400 to 600 people working here with good jobs. They spend more money.
So. Absolutely. Those are some of the things we're working on. But it's also it's been neglected for so long, especially the last 8 years. That was one of the main reasons I decided to run. Because there's such opportunity with the city of St. Louis has been a crime spree for 8 to 10 years now. I mean, they had a prosecutor had to be removed because she wasn't prosecuting crimes.
Yeah, right.
They were legalizing crimes essentially. And,
right.
And then the cops were just giving up because they're like, we arrest these people and they don't prosecute them. So what's the point? Why are we putting our lives in danger?
Yeah.
And then businesses are fleeing. And then COVID happened and that just sped up. That just destroyed the office environment in downtown St. Louis. It was the crime and then COVID and the remote work. And then people were like, well, why are we going to spend all this money to have offices in St. Louis and have these people commute and risk their lives and get carjacked in St. Louis, and when they could be remote or we could be somewhere else.
Right. Yeah.
Our county board chairman should have been recruiting these businesses nonstop.
Right.
That was a great opportunity that was missed. So I am doing these things,
Right.
and I have other developers that are very committed to this region, and they're doing the same thing too. We're doing a lot of it in Wood River right now. I live in Wood River, so I'm really engaged and involved in what's going on there. There's some things going on in Highland and in Granite City. Obviously, Alton, there's a lot of things going on here. I've had good conversations with John Simmons about what he's doing, and everybody has their opinions about what he's doing, whether they like it or don't like it.
Right.
The fact is, he's willing to invest a lot of money here, and I understand it's frustrating. There's projects in Wood River that I get frustrated with that aren't done yet. These things take time.
Jim Mager, the economic development director in Godfrey, was on with me yesterday, and we just talked about. I talked about the. It's almost like you don't want to announce it ahead of time because it takes longer than most people think it's going to take, for whatever reason. And during COVID, it took even longer. But on the other hand, you want to promote it, and you're excited about the news that it's coming. But sometimes you might just think,
then there's a
let's just wait a second and not let people know exactly what it's going to be, because then people are like, well, what is taking so long? But if you've done any home improvement at your house, it probably took longer than you thought it was going to take.
And I'll tell you, one of the big challenges now that we're finding, and we're finding this at the county with some things we put out for bid, is there aren't as many contractors that are available to bid.
Sure, right.
Every contractor I know in every industry, I don't care if it's accounting or restaurants or construction, everybody's hurting for workers.
Right.
The workforce is still extremely loose. It hasn't tightened up, or it's extremely tight. I mean, it hasn't loosened up yet. And it's very difficult for them to find workers. And there's also a lot of these local governments around the country still have ARPA funds, American Rescue Plan Act funds. The county still has over $35 million, maybe 40 million of our original $51 million. And so that money's still being spent. So there's this constant demand out there, which is going to also keep driving inflation and just make things, drive labor costs. It's going to make things tight. So
it's also, I know you and I probably share this philosophy that government can't fix the entire problem. Like it's just got to kind of get out of the way and make it an environment.
Right. Government usually, when they try to help, they have good intentions. They make things worse.
Right.
That's kind of my small government philosophy. Yeah. But look at the COVID response. Number one, aside from the extreme lockdowns and measures that did not work that they put out there, and a lot of these people still refuse to even take any responsibility for the bad decisions they made. The financial decisions that the federal government made were just insane, and nobody's been held accountable for it. The fact that they were, and it's both administrations really, the Trump administration overreacted. The Biden administration just put it on steroids with all of their stimulus that we didn't need. The economy, it was not like 2008 where the economy melted down, the financial markets melted down, and it was going to take years to rebuild. It basically went down for a couple months and then bounced back, and then they just flooded it with stimulus, and we were giving unemployment to people who didn't need it, and we were paying lower wage workers far more in unemployment than they were making, and so there was zero incentive for them to come back to work.
We had
and sending them stimulus checks, and then inflation goes through the roof. It's like you artificially inject $6 trillion into an economy. It's going to take a long time, and it's going to be painful to cycle that back out and get things back to normal.
We bought the Advantage, and they had an employee that I really wanted to hire back once we bought it, and he said, I can't do it. I'm making more. And he was unemployed at the time. He's like, I'm making more sitting here doing nothing than I've ever made in my life. So
and you can't blame, we get frustrated with those people, but the government incentivizes them.
Right.
And people have to make decisions for their own family and their own personal situation. And if the government is giving them more money, then they're going to choose that.
Right.
It's human nature,
I'm willing to give the benefit of the doubt that they really just didn't know. It was something we'd never seen before. They were maybe trying to solve problems, but just the solutions were not effective at all, and in fact, quite detrimental in most cases, especially to small businesses.
I think they made things far worse. Like our mental health situation is in a far worse place than it was pre-pandemic because of the isolation that people felt and these mandatory lockdowns. I mean, and then they, and it was everything became so political. They were focusing more on political science than actual science, I think, because, you had the George Floyd protests.
Right.
And it was perfectly fine.
You could gather
the Department of Health, National Institute of Health, said it was safe to have thousands of people out protesting together, but you could not go to your grandparents' funeral,
right?
Or gather for even a small gathering for a wedding. It was insane.
It was,
and it didn't stop anything. I mean, the masks that they had,
we all got it.
The masks that they had in the schools. Stupid,
not effective at all.
I was so frustrated with my kids' school, but the school board, I'm not a member of that church, so I can't be on their school board, but they know I was frustrated. I was cordial about it, but I was very direct. I'm like, this is ridiculous.
Yep.
Like these kids should not be wearing masks in school.
Not just that, but I mean the school that was months of school that were missed.
Yeah. So thankfully Zion was back open by June 1st for their summer program that year. They never shut down again.
Right.
But a lot of these schools had remote. I mean, Edwardsville, the stuff they did up there was insane. Some of the remote stuff they did. But one of my daughters, she always takes her facial or her cue, like social cues from your facial expression.
Right.
She's been like that since she was a baby. She was convinced that her teacher didn't like her
because she had a mask on.
She did.
Right.
And this teacher is one of the sweetest ladies you'll ever meet. And the first semester she was doing poorly in all of her subjects. And then the masks come off in the spring, and all of a sudden she loves this teacher. You saw her performance in the classroom go up because she could see this lady's beautiful smile, and it was like, man, and she's already an anxious kid anyway. And then she thinks her teacher doesn't like her because all she sees is her eyes, and every kid in the freaking school got COVID at one time or another.
Right.
I mean, so it's like, and none of them got sick. My kids, we didn't even know, we would have never known they had it if we hadn't tested them. I got it. My wife had it and I got it. And then they tested, they never showed any symptoms. It was silly. So,
but just getting back to creating that environment for small businesses to prosper, I think is really the role of government in the whole thing. I mean, but it doesn't mean it's going to work. And, but that's kind of,
we have challenges because the state of Illinois has had horrifically poor public policy that has been detrimental to business.
Right.
Whether it's,
and
high taxes, high regulatory costs and fees, to all these additional things they add. I mean, I own a restaurant, in Edwardsville, and they added like paid leave act. And when I was a kid working in a fast food restaurant, when I was, I worked at McDonald's in Bethalto for a few years when I was in high school and then some in college. I never expected any like vacation time, and now, and like, we're to the point now where we have a good team at our restaurant now, but we struggled for a while, like every other restaurant. We were desperate to get people just to show up every day. We had, there were 6 or 7 times we had to close the restaurant because we didn't have enough employees to run it.
And with the paid leave act, they can not show up, call you 5 minutes before and not give you a reason.
Yeah.
So,
and I'm like, I got so frustrated with some of our legislators, and some of them are my friends that voted for this. And I'm like, there are thousands of restaurants across the state right now that are barely hanging on. We can barely keep our doors open. We're taking anybody that will fog a mirror to come in and work just so we have a body, and they don't show up half the time.
Right.
And now we have to give these people paid time off. I'm like, now we have employees who are like, more full-time that they do. We already had those benefits for them.
My question was, who was this a problem for? Like, who brought this to the table and said, this is a real issue? Like,
Chicago had already been doing it.
We've got greedy business owners that are not giving people time off. I just don't think that was true. I mean,
no. And it happened in the city of Chicago, and then they decided to force it on the rest of the state. So, one of the legislators told me, they're like, oh, it's not going to cost you that much. I said, really? You've looked at my payroll and done an analysis? I said, because this is going to cost me like $4,500 next year. That's $4,500 that doesn't go in my kid's college fund.
Sure.
Right. And I said, and if it's not very much, then why don't you write the check and pay for it?
Sure. Yeah. Right.
So, but anyway, so Illinois has created a lot of work comp is another issue, especially for industry. We're paying 6 times as much in some industries as they are in Indiana. Indiana's is a little more, they're completely at the opposite end. That's probably too employer friendly on work comp. But there's some middle ground there. We're on one extreme and Indiana's on the other extreme. It benefits trial lawyers,
Sure.
But it doesn't benefit us as a whole, to have work comp policy like it is. So what a lot of people will do is they'll sit around and just say, well, we can't do anything. It's the state of Illinois is just tied both hands behind her back. I'm like, no, they have done that. They've tied one arm behind her back, but we can still we have to figure out ways to succeed and thrive despite the poor public policy that's kind of forced on us from Springfield.
Right. I think it's really a great thing for the county that you are a business owner. Talk about buying the restaurant and how that came about. And
well, I bought it just in time for the pandemic.
Sure. Yeah.
But no, it's been an interesting experience. So
I know you and I talked at that time when you were kind of on the fence about it. And
well, we almost, if we would have known how bad COVID was going to get,
probably wouldn't have done it.
Yeah, or at least delayed it.
Sure, right.
And I try not to have many regrets in life because I pray about decisions and there's a reason why things happen. And,
right.
And I've learned a lot through some of the struggles and challenges, but we've been a profitable business, you know, and so I can't complain. It's just been very challenging from a labor standpoint and dealing and keeping managers who have worked in the industry for decades are getting out because they're so frustrated with the people working for them not showing up to work, and they've never dealt with their people are on their phones all the time. And
sure,
but
ridiculous stuff.
But it was a great. I love Quiznos. That's the restaurant, and I've always loved their sandwiches. And I have a business partner who it was also one of his favorite restaurants. He lives down in Columbia, but so we had this opportunity to buy it, and it's in a shopping center I used to manage, for the Plummer family, and so I was very familiar with the lease and this owner, and I knew he was potentially interested in getting it. He hadn't marketed it, but I approached him about buying it through a broker, and it has been a fun experience, challenging at times, but I've learned a lot, and it's been rewarding, and it's just a very good experience. And so my uncle owns Dick Bold. He owns a lot of the McDonald's restaurants in the area.
I had no idea Dick was your uncle. That's great. That's
he's
awesome.
My mom's oldest brother. And he's been a good mentor to me. Yeah. And I worked for him when I was a kid,
For those, he's been on the show, but he owns, tons of McDonald's, seven McDonald's.
Yep. Yeah. And so he bought the two in Edwardsville right before the pandemic too. Now McDonald's is in a different situation because they have a drive-through and we don't at Quiznos. Right. And so they actually, their sales went up during COVID. Ours were down for a while. But I would say one of the most frustrating things was when the pandemic was happening, especially in that first year or two, the city of Edwardsville was so over the top about their lockdowns and their regulations. And then you got outside of Edwardsville and Madison County and you felt like there was almost no pandemic going on.
You would travel to other places. It's like, they're not doing these things.
I walked into a restaurant in Wood River for breakfast one day to meet some folks. It was packed, and I come in wearing a mask, and everybody was
like, "What are you doing?"
I was an alien. Sorry, I thought it was in Edwardsville here.
I'm taking it off.
And then in Edwardsville, they're like mask shaming everyone, And so December of 2020, so they locked it down again and closed indoor dining, which is like devastating to us.
Of course.
And I said, and so for the month of December of 2020, actually sales were still really strong for us. And then in January, things always slow down. And so I come in and I'm doing the deposit one day and I see we have a lot of construction workers that come there, because there's a lot of construction going on around 157 over there. And so these 3 construction workers are sitting like 3 abreast in the front of this truck out in the cold trying to eat sub sandwiches. And I just said, this is stupid. And I went out and I knocked on their window and I said, just come in and eat. This is dumb. And I took all the chairs down off the tables and my employees were like, are we okay with this? I'm like, you know what? Let the city find us. We're just not. This is dumb. Right. And and the mayor at the time is a friend of mine. He's my dentist, Hal Patton. And I just told him, I was like, this is stupid. And you can find me.
Arrest me, whatever you got to do. Right.
Nobody's getting COVID because they sat in my restaurant and ate. So yes, we got through a lot of that. And supply chain issues have been disastrous. Food costs have gone through the roof, but we figured out, I'm never the guy that's going to be the victim. So I'm like, all right, we got to figure out how to make it work. And we've done that.
I mean, that's a good place to end, because that's what being a small business owner is really all about, is figuring it out. It's like a big puzzle.
You're the last person to get paid.
Yes. Right. Yeah.
That's people think that it's so glamorous, and it can be very rewarding.
Good. There's a lot of good things about it,
but you're always the last person to get paid.
Right. But as much as it's rewarding financially, I just think there's more to it than that. Certainly that's part of it. It's nice, or can be nice, but it's just a bigger mission, I think. So,
and I like working in there. So every night, I haven't recently, but like, I know last summer we were short on like Tuesday and Thursdays at lunchtime. So I would come in during my lunch hour at the county and just work the cash register for an hour and a half, and I love interacting with customers.
Right. That's kind of fun. Like I've worked concessions at my kids' basketball games or whatever. It's like I'm kind of enjoying this. I could almost do this for a living,
One of my employees got to see me suggestive selling so much too that it kind of became contagious.
You would like a cookie with that? Or?
Yeah. How about a large soda?
Sure. Yeah. Exactly. Well, I have taken up an hour of your time. This might be the longest episode we've had. So I appreciate you coming on.
You have to do a lot of editing to get
this sure. Right. Yeah. No, this is a great episode. We'll probably have you on again, maybe on a somewhat regular basis, just to talk about things that are going on in the county. And hey, really glad to call you a friend, and appreciate you coming on the show.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks, Chris.
All right. Thanks, Nick.